So I've just started the recording of the webinar, and I will make it available after. So you'll get an email today, tomorrow, maybe the next day, depending on what it is, with a link to the webinar. So if you don't happen to get everything or miss something, definitely it will come out later, and I'll make sure that everybody gets a chance to see it. Just gotta find my mouse here, which is not oriented the normal way it is. Okay. So our leadership team here is I'm Neil Price-Jones, the president of MVP Software Solutions, with more, I would say, than 30 years of experience, but I recently figured that was maybe more than 40, which I don't really want to claim to. In the testing and quality assurance in a wide variety of environments, including financial, utility, and telecommunications. Client size ranged anything from 3 up to many thousands, obviously, with some of the bigger clients, and you'll see some of those at the end with the last couple of slides. Most recently, we've been involved in managing the testing of mission-critical projects where the consequences of failure are quite high. So these are in the utility sector, and that is going to affect my point of view on this, to be honest with you. It's going to be someone who has to sign off, and where the sign off is a binding document. So that's what I'm up against, is that when I sign off something, this means I am committing to the fact that it is right and ready to go in. And the consequences of failure are quite high. They're not small. They're not, we can pull it back. Once it's gone in, it's there. After a certain number of hours, there is no way of going back. And that number of hours ranges anywhere from about 1/12 of an hour, in other words, 5 minutes, up to about 6 hours. But anything after that, we're going forward with what was there. So I don't have a lot of opportunity to pull it back. Rob Verdi, whose picture you also see there, seasoned software leader with extensive experience in organizing, consulting, and thought leadership. And he's worked in maturity assessments, transformation, agile product, comprehensive testing in QA, R&D, and artificial intelligence. So he's got a fair bit of experience here. Rob's not with us today. He's working on another site. So we're going to look at two things today. As per the title, QA in AI and the test lead. And I'm looking at this from two aspects right now. I'm going to split the webinar into two pieces. One is using AI in testing. And generally that means using AI in a test tool, although you obviously could build your own type of direct quote or direct queries there. In the testing industry, this seems to have received a lot of attention. Okay, but that may have to do with the fact that I am in that industry, but I'm seeing a lot of testing tools. And I was just at a conference last week. Every one of them there, we have implemented AI. Here's what it's doing for us. So it's all over the testing tool industry. So using AI in testing will be the first part of our webinar, and we'll talk about what's involved and what can go wrong from that point of view. And then the second one is a little more interesting, but I don't have quite as much information about it. And that's testing a system that has some AI elements incorporated. And this is slightly different consideration. If the system has been coded by AI and then is static, that's not a lot of change from what we've done before. However, if the system has got AI incorporated into it and is using AI as it is running, which is an AI-infused system, then it may generate subtly different outputs each time. And we are not good with dealing with this type of system. So that's a different question. And that came up a lot last week. Now, some other things that inform my viewpoint on this testing and what we're doing here is that we, as in QA, are going to be held responsible for systems integrity at some point. I cannot see that we're going to get away much longer with this sort of we tried our best and it worked when we had it and failure is not really our fault. I know it's complex. I know that things change after it goes into production, but somewhere along the line, we're going to be held responsible for system integrity. For those of you in Canada, where I am and where some of the rest of you are, I know, last week, if you were reading the headlines, there was a class action lawsuit approved against Rogers, which is one of our big telecommunications company, over a massive Rogers outage, which occurred, I'm thinking it's 2 years ago now. I don't exactly remember the date. They've had several, but at any rate, the Quebec courts have agreed that Rogers can now be sued. And I'll be interested to follow this and see what has come about in terms of what happens and who's held responsible, etc. Okay. And another thing which I would suggest you do, and when I get the thing sent out, there's a reference to gaps in AI document. There was a Parasoft webinar a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about how well AI was being tested, what was still manual, the gaps that was left in AI. It was an excellent webinar, and if you remind me at the end, I will try and send you the link to it, or else you can look on the Parasoft website, YouTube website, where they have a lot of their webinars posted. And it's called The Gaps in AI in Testing and What Still Remains Manual. And it was a very, very good webinar. And I think they put it up as a publicly available thing you can look at. Very good stats, very interesting stats in there. The last one I want to reference here, or the second last one, did attend a webinar on security from a security vendor in Waterloo, again, week before last, I believe. And their commentary, summed up in about 3 words, was that the integration of AI into the tech stack causes security amnesia. And that was their basic fundamental point and statement. The infrastructure degrades and the application security degrades. And that was a bit scary because they're obviously up against people who are actively trying to hack into your system. And apparently, the implementation of AI does not do good things for your security. Their comments revolved around AI is still in flux. It's a bunch of experiments. Is it solving real world problems? Is it suitable for the problem at hand? And how do you measure the success? And how do you support the strategy? And one last quote before we move directly into the presentation came again from last week at Star Canada, and a lady who spent a number of months, and I'll reference her again later, putting together a good query to send to a AI system, said that she needed to have it be able to be trusted and explained, and that was difficult. She showed us the query that she used to set up her testing system, generate the test cases, run the test cases, generate the results. It was not trivial. It was not a trivial query that she had put together. So she needed to generate measurable metrics for her management. So as I said, we're going to split this into 2 items as they are different, although they may possibly substantially overlap. Common, however, to both of them, and this was repeated over and over, is the fact that user experience and UAT is still manual. No matter what anybody said about how good AI was or how much it could do for you or what it could gain for you, UX is still manual. The intuitive workflow and branding are all manual test cases still. There was no thought at this stage, maybe in the future, but no thought at this stage that we could do any sort of automated testing using AI on UX. So let's look a bit at what the problems is when we use AI in testing. So this was a quote from someone on the internet recently, and I did like his little list here of things. So what really happens when you add AI into your testing? And the comment was you get to be a superpower or you get a superpower, but every superpower has its side effects. And what the side effects are is you get speed on your testing, but you may lose control. AI writes tests very fast, but you might not understand how it works. Or it's like a fast car, you don't know how to fix it if it breaks down. And when it breaks down at speed. Tests may break more often. Now, this is not entirely new with AI. He attributed it to AI, but we've always had this problem with automated tests. And I know some people on the call could testify to that. AI tests are sensitive, to small changes. Now, there are ways around that. We've been programming around that for years in automation. The button moves, the button changes color, the text changes a little bit, the field moves. And there's all sorts of algorithms we've built over the last 40 years to get around these problems. But still, the tests are a little brittle and they are subject to breaking when a change is made in the application under test. So you may spend more time fixing tests than you do originally. Kind of relates to the first one. You get speed, but you lose control. You may trust too much. Again, AI finds the obvious bugs. It's been trained on what is out there, so it knows what is usually failing. You can fix this. There are ways around this as well, but it may not find the creative problems. So it may not know about those, and human thinking still beats AI for tricky bugs. So it's difficult if we trust it too much. And we'll get back to that when we talk a little bit about the time factor and how long we can run. Your job may change and new skills will be needed. So there is less time to write test code. There's more time thinking about what to test. You may, however, or you will, however, become a test designer instead of a test writer. And eventually, and the prediction is in about 2 years, a test orchestrator. So we're simply going to orchestrate what's going to happen. We're not actually going to just do it. And assuming, by the way, you are seeing the screen is being shared. You will need new skills. Learn to talk to AI, to prompt it, learn to check AI's work, and learn to make smart test plans. The bottom line is AI won't take your job, but it will change it. The best testers will use AI to help them, not to get a replacement. So using AI to augment your testing, and for the test lead who has to manage or sign off on this, the following items are critical. Is the testing complete? And how do we know? And we're going to look through these in detail in the next few slides. Are we testing excessively? Because it's easy to generate test cases, test steps, execute test cases and report, and then repeat until we get it right. Or the functional statement that more is better, which is not necessarily true, means we may be doing excessive testing of some things and completely missing other things. You can do this manually. I mean, it is possible to miss stuff manually. It's possible to miss it with regular automation, but it's equally possible to miss it with AI augmented testing when you can generate, and I've seen it done, tens or hundreds of test cases with very little effort. And how are you going to check them and know if they're really different or whether they're just variations on a theme? We have lost touch, as alluded to in the previous slide, with what may be actually occurring, and that brings up the question of interpretation. How do I interpret what I'm getting out of the test tool? Is it correct? Am I pulling what I should? Do I even understand what I'm getting? And we need to interpret that, and we do that as a manual tester. But it will be too easy for me not to dig into the results, particularly if the testing is compressed at the end. And are the steps and results actually correct? And again, if I have limited time for review, I may not know if the steps that I've used to run a test case are correct or whether it's incorrect. And finally, defects. Defects have been subject to automated evaluation for years in some environments. I've used the tools. We use weighted algorithms to make decisions. That's been around for a long time, but it has not taken off quite as much as we expected, and it may or may not be useful in terms of AI, for knowing exactly what has gone wrong. So the question is, do we even know what is a defect or whether it's going to work? So digging a little bit deeper here, are there items missing from the tests? And this is coming under the category of completeness. AI can generate many test cases very, very quickly. So it's going to be very tempting, and I saw this on a diagram from SmartBear, to wait until the last possible moment to press the button on generation, execution, reporting, and completion. I'll just wait and wait and wait for the perfect system to come along and give me the chance to actually run it. But that will leave me almost no time for a proper review. It will be very tempting, and the pressure from the PM will also be in on that, to just keep going, generate, build the steps, run, report, and move on, and wait until after, by the way, the after does not exist, to do my evaluation. That is a bad time to start asking if I've omitted things, because at that stage, I'm under pressure to get the project done. And yes, I've worked on multi-year projects where we've got multiple sessions of testing, but this is just going to compress each one. So it may also be hard to identify omissions with compressed timelines in the testing if it waits to the last minute. And it may also be hard to identify omissions if I don't have test system knowledge. And because I may be parachuted in very late as a tester, because look, you don't need much time for testing, I may not have much chance to learn the system. That already occurs, but was generally ameliorated by having me write test cases, and I learned the system at that point. I'm just pressing a button to do them. I'm not learning that system. Excessive testing by AI. This all comes down to risk, really. So number one, over testing for low risk items. It's not quite in the order I had it. If the AI generates, many test cases, but they're all low risk, what am I gaining? Yes, they don't take long to run. Yes, they can be reported on very quickly. Yes, they will run quickly, but they may not be doing much for me in terms of risk. The other danger, of course, is testing items that are not part of the system if I don't know what the system fully does and I don't know the testing boundaries. If the boundaries of the system are in flux, then that may affect my testing. I may either omit stuff or extend beyond the boundaries. Irrelevant bugs may be created, wasting time. Either I've tested things that are not part of the remit, or I'm over testing for low risk items and wasting everybody's time. Is the system being interpreted correctly by AI? If AI is being introduced to a system, it may lack context. Now, there are ways around this with what's called RAG, which is retrieval augmented, and you can add that into your testing. It learns from your system at hand, you gain some information. But systems evolve over the course of a project. So that may not all be included in your augmented generation system. So you may not have all of that in your test system, which means you may be missing things. They may or may not be critical, but the question is the system being interpreted correctly by AI? Is the system or testing risk being interpreted correctly? And last week, again, I was at a conference down in Toronto, and Robert Sabarin, who may be familiar to some of you, has now added a third dimension to the typical risk matrix. Normally, we had probability and impact, as you're probably well aware. Probability times impact gives you a risk, and there'd be 16 squares, some red, some orange, some green, some uncolored. He is now suggesting a third dimension to the risk model, which is the AI's autonomous decision model or decision axis. So in other words, we have our two risk, impact, and probability adding up to our risk. Now we need to add a third axis sort of coming out of the page that says what autonomous decisions are being made by AI and what risk does that add to my testing or my system. So that's kind of an interesting addition because, of course, that increases the difficulty of calculating the risk by quite a little bit. There is a company in Germany who does multi-dimensional risk matrices, but I don't think they've included this yet. Again, the UX, nobody says to trust it at this stage. Don't trust AI with your UX. It won't get it right. Steps and results. Another little drive down here. Do the AI generated steps align with the test objective? And that really was true in manual and automated testing before. Anybody can take a test objective, write a bunch of steps, and they may not actually reflect the original meaning of that test objective. So we have to question whether something that's automated also does that. Do the expected results align with the expectations? Again, I've seen people write test cases and they totally misinterpreted the system. Excuse me. They totally misinterpreted my test objectives and what I wanted. So they didn't align. And that was manual. Unfortunately, I had the time to correct it. The last question is, are the results masking errors that might have occurred? I've seen this done. If the testing is done in a certain order, it is quite possible to miss the fact that interim results are wrong. I've done it myself. I mean, this can be done manually, certainly can be done by an automated script, and it definitely could be done by AI. So we could be masking errors that we need to see. And somebody quoted a rather extreme example a couple of weeks ago online of using AI to test the system. And he took away the entire application, and the test tool reported it back as perfectly tested and all working. It didn't do anything, But obviously, it just simply said, well, nothing there, so nothing to report, so perfection, which was a little bit depressing. Um, and if you went forward with that, you'd be reporting on nothing. Effectively, you'd be reporting a empty situation. And finally, for defects, out of my five sort of criteria there, does the AI understand what constitutes a pass? Or will it decide that it's an ignorable error? Also, false positives or false negatives, stating something is an error when it is not, and stating something is not an error when it is. There is always that possibility when it's doing the judgment call and you're not. Now, learning from results is something that AI does quite well. That's one of its many advantages. It does learn from what it sees, incorporates it into the model, and next time around, it generates something that is more in tune with what is there. So we do have that iterative chance of getting closer. However, people may make decisions that impact the expectations, and that may not be communicated to the AI model. New requirements, modifications based on regulatory changes, something that we need to do that we were not aware of when the project started. Now, I did mention to you a little bit earlier about RAG. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and that is a technique that enhances large language models by providing them with an external, up-to-date, and relevant data. So instead of relying on the training that it had earlier, you can yank in RAG and say, okay, what is current for this project? What needs to be incorporated into the testing? So it does add a little bit of safety and security for the learning from results, but we have to make sure, obviously, that wherever it's yanking this data from, that is also reflective of the current status of the project and what has been decided in whatever risk meetings or business meetings you might have had. So that's of concern in the sense that that's a different method or process than what we've normally done. We're not used to going and updating some model and then feeding it into the test cases as a fixed process that must be done ahead of generation. We generally picked up new information, sometimes on the fly, and then incorporated test cases for it. As for those of you who've done this, and I'm assuming that's pretty well all of you, I'm sure you've been through where we didn't test that. When did that become true? Or when was that included? Or how come I didn't get told about that? All of this now has to go into the AI model or into this other piece that's being included in order to make sure it's there. And this is particularly true with items that are not common out in the outside world. And frankly, most of what I test is not. Um, Last two systems I tested, there's two vendors in the world and probably a few hundred clients, but there are only two vendors. And by the time we had finished modifying it, it bore no relationship to the standard product. Absolutely none, because of the traditional statement of the way the particular company I was working with defined things and how they literally colored them. The way they worked was different than anybody else, and some of it was reversed from what the standard product was. So, as you can well imagine, that would make a big difference for the way in which it was tested. It made it difficult. So, what do we do? What do we do as a test lead when we have these potential problems? Well, number one, we've got to rewrite the test plan to enhance pre-execution reviews of artifacts. We must review the artifacts before they are used. Now, again, please keep in mind, I'm coming from a background here where I can be audited, and I have to be able to prove that those are the artifacts I tested against. Those are the test cases I used. Those are the test steps I used. These are the screens or whatever results I received. These are the bugs that were generated as a result. Here's the completion and finish off of those bugs. Here's the resolution. I could be audited at any time, and I have had calls, 2 or 3 years later after finishing a project saying, where is the proof for test case XYZ? When you were here 3 years ago executing it, they do audits 3 years later. Sometimes it's for lessons learned, sometimes it's because there was a problem. But I have been called much later and asked, where's the stuff? So number one, we need to rewrite the test plan to enhance pre-execution reviews of artifacts. We need to review them before they are used. And once they're locked down, they should not be changed except via formal change control and versioning process, which is the second point here. So we need to make sure that those are all locked down. There's at least one test tool I know of that does this. They're actually certified by a couple of the American departments, which are fairly high security, that their method they use to lock everything down is sufficient to satisfy those departments. So they have gone to the effort of making sure that they can be used by those departments and have sufficient security and control to work for that. So if we are working in that type of industry, we need to lock that down. If we're not, it may not be so critical, but it's still helpful. Ensure that you've addressed all the items above that were mentioned in the previous slides, and some other things that I didn't actually get included because of time factors, not to do with AI. New skills that will need to be in your group includes prompt writing, large language model knowledge, machine learning for at least some of your people. As I said to you before, in 2 years, testers will be orchestrating, not writing, as will the test lead, and we'll be doing a lot of reviewing. That said, I mean, I can't get away from the fact that traditional testing will continue for many years. I can't see some of my clients moving in the next few years. The risk is too high. The risk of getting something wrong is simply far too high for them to do this. Other things we need to do, ensure regulatory compliance if required. We can't wait till the end kind of to sew it up and say, here's the package that I'm going to leave with you for this project that was, implemented last week or whatever. We need to make sure that all the things that were used during the process are sufficient to pass regulatory rules, and some of them are quite worldwide. So security of artifacts, adherence to standards with respect to writing, templates, versioning, etc. Multiple controlled and completed reviews. Again, I'm coming from a background where this is necessary and they will not move forward without it. Obviously, you may be able to slip past some of these if it's not quite so critical. I need to have these artifacts and the proof that they have not been touched. SMEs. Now, this is an awkward one. SMEs generally provided their information at the beginning in terms of business cases and requirements and maybe user stories, etc. And then they often tended to walk away. Well, seeing as we're generating things in an automated fashion, they're going to need to do a little extra unbudgeted time in review. So we need to make it clear that they're needed and get their commitment during the project, not just at the beginning. I had this in my test plan, commitment of the SMEs to review stuff. It was hard to get their attention. And this is pre-AI, I might add, a long time ago. But we definitely had some difficulty getting them back after. Your argument back is, I've already spent the time. What more do you need now? And the answer is, we need you to review what's been generated. Other things that we're going to need to know, rewrite the test plan to enhance post-execution reviews. We need to compare those artifacts again to make sure nothing is changed if they're critical. The test cases, test scripts, expected results, proof, all kind of match up in a neat little package. And again, please keep in mind that in AI, there's going to be bigger time pressure than we've experienced before because of that fact that we are no longer writing and sort of debugging and then executing and then fixing a little bit and augmenting. That's all supposed to happen instantly without any problems. So we need to make sure that we get that post-execution time to prove that everything's correct. We can build it in, but we need to make sure it's done. Ensure the artifacts match their starting point. If they're locked down, that shouldn't be an issue. And then lessons learned are critical with new tech. So lessons learned all over the place, including in how, when, why we used AI. We might be able to move them up in time from the usual post-project review, but we need to be sure that they have been addressed. So just as a bit of a summary, potential issues for the test lead. Is my testing and reporting accurate, particularly obviously my reporting. And even with non-AI augmented items, we have this problem. I mean, is the report accurate? I spent many hours trying to resolve a difference between the development lead and myself on a number of Jira issues for a very big project. And eventually we tracked it down to the way she was doing queries versus the way I was doing queries, but we still couldn't come to an agreement. I thought I was done. She thought I wasn't. Incomplete scope coverage goes. Now, some of you will say, well, hook it to the requirements. Requirements are covered. We're good. That shifts the problem to requirements. Doesn't get rid of it. It just shifts it. And finally, another potential issue, if I have to have it, which I generally do, is a loss, excuse me, of traceability. Some of the tools incorporate this, many of them do it automatically, but I need to make sure I'm tracing to the correct artifact, and I'm going to have many, many more artifacts than I had before. I could have literally thousands of test cases very, very quickly. And you cannot trace that manually. You have to trace that using a tool. What might we gain? Well, judging from all the stats that have come out, a reduction in time for test creation, execution, and reporting. Absolutely. All that time we spent writing test cases and reporting on them and reviewing them has now been cut to review. We still got to do that. But it shouldn't take us time to create and potentially execute them. There is a potential for greater coverage at higher speed, as long as we understand what we're covering. And we should have a longer time available to analyze the results because we have compressed that center piece where we're doing all the sort of grunt work of putting it together. But as long as you're up to the point where you trust the results, these are some wonderful, wonderful benefits we can have for a test lead if we're using AI to test it. But my overall comment is when I generate one of my reports, I had to be absolutely sure it was right. I mean, I couldn't report, no defects, ready to proceed to the next phase or ready to be implemented, only to find out there was a whole bunch I missed or there was coverage I missed. So I need to do that up front and make sure it's correct. Okay, that was the first half. And we're about 12:34 here, and we started a little bit late, so we'll get done on time here. Testing an AI-infused system, which is the term they were using last week. So one of the keynotes at Star Canada last week talked about the fact that adaptive AI can adjust itself at runtime. That means that if you've got AI infused into your system, you may get different results from time to time. As a matter of fact, you're most likely to get different results all the time. So if adaptive AI can adjust itself at runtime, that system is no longer deterministic. Now, not all systems were deterministic before, but the vast majority I've ever dealt with are. Even if we're using sometimes series to get solutions which have to converge, they usually converge in a nice way. So adaptive AI adjustments can mean that the system is no longer deterministic. There can be a human and societal impact on what happens with an AI infused system because it may change its mind or change its output. The system boundaries, something we've traditionally used to guide the breadth of testing, may be sensitive or fluid. They may change, and that's not something we're used to. And as I said before, we are not good at dealing with non-deterministic systems. So the solution, which will make you happy, was to use agents to test the agents. In other words, use AI to check whether the AI was correct, which led you into a recursive statement of agents all the way down, which somebody thought was maybe not the best idea. In other words, you effectively say, well, if the system is infused with AI, we'll use an AI to almost build a parallel system and make sure it's right. But the problem is, have we built it correctly in the first place, which is where we have to be worried. So we have to know whether it's right in the first place. So he also mentioned the possibility of using community-based testing. And I mentioned to you also the risk before, adding the risk to both sides, or adding the autonomous decisions. So what do we got? Well, if we're testing an AI-infused system, how do we know if it's correct? what is correct? And this, by the way, has been around more than just AI. This predates AI by quite a little bit, but it wasn't that prevalent. I think it's going to become more prevalent. So, what constitutes correct for output? We don't know how the AI is reacting. The impact today downstream applications. I attended a webinar earlier this year, and one of the bank people there from one of the big Canadian banks said, we have major problems with this. He has an AI infused system upstream from him. He's getting output he's not expecting, and he's having trouble with his lower or downstream applications taking that input and working properly. So this is already creating problems, and they're having to put guidelines around what they will and will not accept, which we've always done. But this is less obvious to us because we're not the ones who are actually kind of generating that output. Can we correctly interpret the results that are generated if we don't know how they were generated? Or do we just accept them, which is also dangerous? Is the reporting from the application, not test reporting in this case, but the reporting from the application correct when we test it? We may have lost some of the sources and been modified and had it been modified to remove some aspects. And finally, do we know what a defect is if all of the above is questionable? So correctness, what does constitute a correct response? I attended a webinar at least 3 or 4 years ago now, where the person said, well, the results can shift within this band. And then she was recalculating the band every time we did a run. And of course, the band was progressively shifting. Over time, the system was shifting the results, and it was migrating towards one or the other end of the spectrum. She didn't seem to worry about it. I unfortunately couldn't get an answer as to what would happen if it moved out of that band. So it may be hard to identify a correct response. And will the response change over time? Almost absolutely. Okay, almost absolutely. So if the system under test is being programmed using AI, do we actually know the correct response? And can we identify? It's possible the response will change over time, as I just mentioned. Impacts of AI in a system on the application itself. So what has changed in the way the application is programmed? And for those of you who have some background in this, we have a long history of trying to automate programming and then finding out it doesn't work and then modifying it and then going back and saying, but that's not what was generated. And on the next release, we regenerate, which of course is not what was implemented. And around we went until we discarded the package. This happened a long time ago. Um, this is not new in this sense. But we have much more power now, and AI is definitely more powerful than the tool I'm referencing here. So it may work better, but we don't know exactly what happens. If the output is slightly variable, the downstream applications may react in ways we do not expect. And I have yet to see a study on how much it costs to run a system where AI is being used every time. If you're actually generating a query, we all know those queries or prompts are expensive. That adds to the cost of running the system. And, what is the impact on the overall budget when you've got a much more expensive system to run? Generally, of course, all the cost was in building it, not in running it. Are the results generated, are the generated results being interpreted correctly? Can we even interpret them? Is the risk being interpreted correctly? And that's both the risk of the system and the risk of the development process, which was used to generate it. Newly programmed systems can be brittle, right? They haven't got everything that kind of makes them less brittle and acceptable recovery from errors. So new systems tend to be a little bit prone to collapsing. If we're generating a brand new system every time we run, what's going to happen here? And then UX, I've mentioned this over and over. UX has got to be done by people, not going to be done by AI. Again, are the results, and this is system results, not testing results, being reported correctly? Do we even know? And what happens when the results change? And are those results masking errors elsewhere in the system? I've seen that happen where I tested a accounting system a long time ago, and the overall total was correct. Whatever, can't remember what it happened to be, but think it was revenue for the year. So when I looked at the overall total, which he'd added up one way, it was correct. But when we added up the month totals, which were supposed to generate, kind of a monthly picture for you through the year, it didn't come out to the same figure for the same year under the same conditions. Before you ask, he missed a month. And because of the way the system was programmed, you could easily miss a month. Um, yes, it's an old system, but the fact was that had we gone live with it, that result of the overall total for the year would have masked the fact that his monthly totals were not correct. So, masked it in the details. And somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, how come this doesn't add up? Fortunately, it was caught in testing, not afterwards. The other one, will the lack of knowledge of coding, of how it was coded, hide defects that will show up after go live? For those of us who have actively tested, which I assume is all of you, you get that feeling that somewhere down there is a defect, right? You have a feel, literally a feel that somewhere down there's a defect that I should dig a little further for. And that will not come out of AI because it's not going to think of the odd cases. A human being is much more creative. And this applies whether the system was generated by AI or not. Could we get new defects that we haven't had in the past because of the way it's working? In other words, because it's not consistent in the way it operates from run to run, potentially new defects could arise each time it's run. We could be chasing them forever. And can we learn from the defects to improve our processes? In other words, quality assurance, if the whole process is moving very, very quickly. Again, something that we need to bunk in the time for. So the test lead response. Again, rewrite the test plan to enhance post-execution reviews. I need to know what I've done and where it's come from. Document what happened and interpret what happened, and ensure the answers to all the items above. I know those are fairly general, but to dig down a little bit further would be more than I can do within an hour. So just a couple of marketing slides my marketer always insists I put in before we get into questions. I see Yuri has one there. MVP can help you with the following items: assessment, health checks, consulting, testing, requirements, skill resources, and we are working on some training and courses. UX and UAT must be done by knowledgeable people. AI cannot judge that. They cannot judge how well you can operate. We can help with that too, but in general, I would just say we need to make sure that AI has properly judged it. Or sorry, AI cannot judge UAT. Sorry, I'm looking for my cursor, which has disappeared. If you're in a startup, we do have a presentation on product assurance if anyone is interested. It concentrates on how we would deal with your product to ensure its quality, reliability, realize cost savings, attain customer satisfaction, enable faster time to market, and satisfy compliance and manage risk. So if you're working in a startup and you have a concern that you're not going to be satisfactory to your potential clients, give me a call, see what we can say about that, because we definitely have some experience working with startups in addition to working with large companies. And finally, we also offer fractional management. If you just don't need full-time QA, it's probably not applicable to this group. This was more built for Communitech and Waterloo. Oh, and the rest of it, we are doing courses, which will come out. I'll send you a site at some point, but that won't be for a little while. Just a few examples of some of the customers, some of which I'm embarrassed to have on there, but it wasn't the system that blew up that caused us the testing. Okay, so Yuri, you have a question. Let me just make this bigger. Okay, so
This isn't a
Yuri's
question, just a comment.
just a comment
Sometimes
that
AI can provide repeatable answers.
yeah, as long as you set it up correctly, and I suppose put enough guidelines around it and parameters to force it to do it, right? But
Correct.
or provide different answers. Yeah. So you would think everybody program in for the same answer if you're working in a system, but it better be the right one, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, good comment there. It can be done. We just need to know how, right?
I just learned it this week.
Okay, then you've learned something this week I haven't yet. You're one up on me, Yuri. Okay, anybody else have a question? Okay, well, the contact information, come on, move off that slide. Um, you signed up anyway, so you roughly know where I am. You probably got an email from me about the course. That's the phone number, that's the website, and that's the email. So if you feel you'd like to get in touch with me, I will be in touch. Either, well, as I say, either this afternoon, but more likely Thursday, um, with a copy of the recording if you wish to download it, and share it anywhere. We have a couple of other slides here which are not really relevant, but some of you will have seen the costs of low quality. I'm sure that's familiar to everybody in this call. And what else have I got here? Yeah, that's why. For those of you working in startups, the market viability we feel depends on three pillars of customer experience. It can't be done by AI, business value, and security and compliance in this day and age. And finally, if you are looking in a startup, ensure future funding and progressions. Let me see if I can say that fast 3 times. Okay, any other questions? I know it was a bit fast. I wasn't quite sure how long it was going to take, and it is over lunchtime. Well, thank you very much for attending. I will send out a link to the course, to the presentation. There were a couple of people who couldn't attend who wanted to see it. So that's definitely going to be the case. Thank you very much, and we will talk to you again.